So, New Year, what are we going to talk about? I am a fan of New Year's resolutions personally. I just think no matter what, regardless of the time of year, it's always good to check in with ourselves, to take a meeting with ourselves, and to realign our goals, set some intention, some positive intentionality for the year to come. Last year, my main intention was just to increase an experience and a knowledge of peace in my life. It was a really powerful and lovely intention, and I gleaned a lot from it, moving further into my understanding of social justice. So I'll get into my intention for this year later on, but really coming into the new year and coming out of all of the chaos and confusion of the holiday season, what I really noticed in social media and just interactions with other people I love, clients, is just some nuances of cynicism. I think that culturally, I'm noticing, like we're just kind of edgy, frustrated. I've made sense of this because of all the trauma that we've gone through and just the distress. If you're somebody who worked all the way through the pandemic and lockdowns, as I was, the stress buildup and all of the way that impacted us psychologically, physically, emotionally, spiritually, a very difficult existential experience, long-term distress. On top of that, there's all sorts of other things just going on in our lives. There is all sorts of big T trauma, little T trauma. So emotional hangovers. It's an interesting term, right? Emotional hangover. What is this thing? An emotional hangover it's actually been researched, and you can look up all sorts of interesting studies on it. It's a proven experience when we come through a time of trauma or stress. And this is why the holiday season can be so interesting and difficult for us. Not only are we enjoying our vices like food and salt and sugar and turkey dinner. Oh my word, the amount of salt in turkey dinner. So the food comas and then the food hangovers, and then we're indulging in other things, treats and sugar and alcohol and just all these things that normally we don't overdo. So we know that from food and alcohol, things that we ingest physically, of course, we will have some sort of brain and body reaction the next day. Emotional things that we're ingesting also can contribute to an emotional hangover. How I make sense of an emotional hangover versus burnout is, and I think that it could be long term, but mostly from what I understand, what I've read, we look at an emotional hangover as like a shorter duration, whereas burnout is maybe a pileup of emotional hangovers, and all of how that impacts our brain, and our lid is flipped and it's stuck. Our adrenaline doesn't come down. Things we've talked about on the blog when we're trying to understand stress and how it impacts our body. Emotional hangover. So some of the symptoms might just be like feeling excessively drained and exhausted, moody, more irritability, just not yourself. So feeling off. And it's more than just, oh, I woke up and I'm tired today. It's something is lingering. And anxiety, of course. So if I have a difficult interaction, I'm really tuned into my anxiety because I've had to be, because occupational hazard. And I can oftentimes play the tape of that day and figure out maybe the incident that caused me some of that emotional plaque, is what I will call it. And whatever the emotional plaque is, this thing that I'm carrying, it's sort of tarnishing my energy. It's impeding on my sense of groundedness. When we're unaware to those emotional events that we're carrying, big or small T traumas, they do impact us emotionally. If we're doing reasonably well, then an emotional hangover seems like more realistic. So maybe I had a bad incident happen yesterday, the day before, but I'm doing pretty good. Today, I kind of feel like, off and not that great. Just carrying the impact of what had happened. Maybe I'm reasonable enough to talk it through with somebody or vent about it, to think on it, and to help myself process through. However, if I have a lot of these things building up over time, it's harder for me to notice them to see the individual incidences that I'm carrying, call it a stress pileup. And in a stress pileup, that's when we're more at risk of burnout. Most of the professionals that I see as clients are pretty burnt out. We're crispy. I've been feeling crispy. I've been mindful of my crispiness and trying to really process through all of the events of the pandemic and how that impacted me and my stress, to really do away with some of those plaques so that I can cope with the smaller incidences and the emotional hangovers as they're coming up. So just right now, I'm thinking one freebie tip that I wasn't planning on including is, if this is starting to make sense for you, emotional hangover, the question mark of am I burnt out coming into 2023, a simple thing that you can do is write down, we would say, if we're giving this for homework to a client, write down your top 10 distressors or triggers. I would even just say in the past 6 months. And if you start there, then maybe you extend that, because it has been really, really strange, especially if you're a company policymaker or somebody who is caring for other people's livelihoods. Over the past 2.5 years, it was really, really distressing to make sure that people had jobs and that we were keeping each other safe because of all the things that we were worried about, things we just really, really didn't understand. Okay, we were doing the best we could, but it was traumatic and it was difficult. Now, when we're evaluating emotional hangovers and burnout, part of what is also really important, and again, in times of stress, we don't feel grounded within ourselves. So my sense of normal within is not quite right. So there's an internal state and there's an external state. Now, normally, we have some sense of how we control our internal state. We have some sense of normal, hopefully, or else we go to therapy to figure out how to make peace with our internal state. And when we have some internal state knowledge, then something happens. I'm doing pretty good. There was one incident yesterday or the day before. I know there's an emotional plaque spot. I can honor it. I can notice it. I can reason with it. Hello, problem. Let's have a conversation. I can do all these things and kind of come through it because I have balance inside of me with my internal state. If I lose my footing inside, if I'm not balanced inside, then it's going to be harder to notice this event, this trigger, and to process through my own thoughts and feelings so that I can make some sense of it, so that I can integrate it back in. And that's where it can get lodged as trauma. If I don't know how to integrate it in and make peace with it, then it's not going to be comfortable. Said this before, trauma is like when you bite our cheek, we just kind of want to keep going back and touching it with our tongue. You know, it's just a thing our brain does when there's a traumatic incident, big T trauma or little t. So Christmas stress, even just cooking Christmas dinner, could be a very little t trauma, unless you like drop the turkey or you have abusive people that you're cooking with or something like that. Then it could be a bigger T or a capital T trauma. Or maybe there is something, if you got stranded in the airport, that's trauma. That's very traumatic. If you're stuck on an airplane for 12 hours, that's traumatic. There's all sorts of different things to notice. It's just a stressful time of year, and then there's these different nuances, and we have families, whether we visit them or not. So all of our trauma stuff is talking to us, big or little. And emotional hangovers are a real thing. When they're unchecked, that's when we run more of the risk of burnout. So what is my internal state? How am I doing with it? Do I have my footing? Do I have balance? And if I don't, then it's going to be harder to manage whatever external state or external the environment that is happening to me, with me, for me. The less footing I have inside, the less footing I have outside in my relationships and the events that are going on, the more likely it is that I'm going to put my foot in my mouth, or I'm going to do something that I don't appreciate about myself. And then the next day, that fuels more of this emotional hangover. So emotional hangover is some sort of remorse. It's the consequences. Boy, the more I'm talking about this, it just really reminds me of the cycle of behavior, where there's an event or a trigger, something happens, and we feel and we think and we think and we feel, and it leads into some sort of rituals. So there's a buildup. And if we're stuffing things inside, then, whatever that ritual might be, those behaviors that lead up to some sort of explosion, which is maybe saying the wrong thing. Maybe that's how that irritability, the moodiness shows up, or we do something regretful, impulsive behavior, misusing food or alcohol, Boxing Day shopping, emotional hangover, and then going shopping on December 26th. Risky business, right? That leads into our regret and our remorse, and really just struggling with our negative beliefs about ourselves. So there's a lot of pain buildup in all of this. And it is really hard to sit and be present with ourselves when we're in these cringe moments of, why did I do that? Oh my word. I thought I was different. I thought I was better than this. So emotional hangovers, burnout. Burnout is a real thing. Emotional hangovers are a real thing. These are things that we definitely can be mindful of heading into 2023. If I'm talking about these things and you're saying, wow, I think Tara's talking right to me, pay attention to that. It is good to check in with your mental health provider. And if you don't have one, you can give our office a call and see if we're the right fit for you. However, it is important that we take this stuff very seriously. You don't want to burn out completely. It's hard recovery for many, and actually some people don't recover from burnout. We want to take care of our body, take care of our emotions. Now, you know me, maybe you're just starting to learn who I am, but my thesis is on wellness and balance. And wellness is not bullshit. Wellness is actually one of the simplest tools we have for self-evaluation. So the wellness wheel. All right. With the wellness wheel, social, emotional, intellectual, physical, occupational, spiritual, we have 6 dimensions to who we are as people. And this is an easy way to evaluate. Many times I have said to clients, and at least twice here, that in January, take a meeting with myself and I just sort of go through the wellness wheel to consider, how am I doing as an individual? How do we cope with emotional hangovers via the wellness wheel? So first off, one of the important things when we're in a time of distress, if you have an anxiety flare up, if you're like, oh, is this an anxiety attack? Is this a panic attack? People often will say panic attack. You're probably not having one, but you possibly could be. So am I having a period of anxiety? Am I just moody? Am I irritable? Is this emotional hangover? Physical. The easiest way to manage our instability, number one way to cool down a hot brain, is physical activity. So getting some cardio, have a mini dance party, turn on the Christmas music. Oh, I guess it's January. R&B, I don't know. Something you enjoy, Taylor Swift, shake it off, whatever it is. So we go for a walk, we go for a swim, we just get moving. Go lift weights if that's your thing. But cardio, bilateral stimulation, it's a great way to cool down a hot brain. The other thing is if you're noticing that you're in some time of distress, walk of shame, stuff, it's January 1st, maybe you drank too much last night, then to consider as well, balanced food. Okay, so the more we can put good stuff in times of distress, we reach for things that are terrible for us: grease, sugar, alcohol. One of the best things we can do is find our footing with healthy food choices. So get into some good, make a nice healthy chili or a homemade pizza with some whole toppings. Try to avoid alcohol, try to avoid cannabis. It's legal now, trying to just get our baseline. Water. Drink lots of water, right? So we find our footing, we're putting good fuel in to get our brain and our body feeling good. So physical, intellectual part of the wellness wheel. So journal. This can mean literally journaling. You can write it in your phone. Maybe you have an old school actual journal, so we can write things in here. Sometimes for me, journaling is I just sort of have a conversation with myself. It's very gestalt, which sounds so much better. So gestalt. But having this conversation, or parts work, internal family systems. Gestalt sounds better though. It's just a lovely last name, but word. Having a conversation with whatever is distressing you. Being really cognitive and reasonable with the problem. So I sometimes don't journal. I don't really journal about me per se, but as a journal functions for some, what functions for me is I just sort of counsel my problem. And you are a wise, good person in your life. One of the ways that you might know that is you're watching this YouTube, and if you watch things like this, you watch other reasonable things, or you listen to great podcasts, you're reading great books. So you have what it takes to be the wise, good other who is going to speak to this problem and this dilemma. Okay. Social. Recharge with loved ones. And considering which people you need to recharge with. So if you're in a time of distress and you just need to process it through somebody else, I just try to get a little bit calmer inside and evaluate who's the person I'm going to talk to about this. If you're so lucky to have children or pets, sometimes for me, if I'm feeling a little bit emotionally hungover, just chilling with my kid and cuddling, or laughing, or getting out and doing something fun with them. So exercise, going swimming with my kids. I'm going to go swimming with my kids today, and that's going to feel great. It's going to help me with my emotions regardless of where I'm at. I don't really feel emotionally hungover today. I feel pretty good, but nonetheless, it can be a preventative measure as well, right? All of these things, we front load or we back load, depending on where we're at. That's what's so great about the wellness wheel. If I do some preventative things, great. If I have it, then I can backfill. Okay, so socially, spiritually, I love spirituality. I just really love theology and all these things. I am so grateful for the experience of focusing on peace last year, and for all these amazing teachers that I got to learn from so intimately about peace and love and being included. So this year, actually, my intention, and it fits with this spiritual practice, it's the 12 days of Christmas right now. So I have been mindful of that and reading about the different feasts of the saints, which has been very helpful for me. And then I had been wrestling with what's my intentionality for the new year. And actually, just for me, it fits with the spiritual piece, is to become more intimately acquainted with the saints. So that's not part of my faith practice in the past, but I feel really passionate about knowing the martyrs and the saints more intimately. I loved the mystics when I was younger and I was studying theology, but here I am. I'm going to buy this little book of the saints and read it daily, share it with my children. And again, that is something that is going to be front loading with my wellness to help prevent emotional hangovers. And it's also going to be backloading because, hey, we can't get it all right all the time. And without rupture, there's no repair, which is vital to secure attachment. So just to normalize, we can't have it perfect all the time. There's no such thing as perfect wellness. However, wellness is always a great evaluation. So meditation, prayer, singing, chanting. It was really interesting at my kids' Christmas Mass. I took communion from the priest, which I was told it was okay, and it felt really enduring, and it felt very good for me spiritually. It was one of those things that I didn't expect to give me some footing and balance, but sharing in a faith practice of a church I'm curious about, the Catholic Church. Another thing was I had the opportunity to go to a baby baya, which is a beautiful service ceremony, and it's not my own faith practice, but again, it was so rich with spirituality that I found my footing and my groundedness. I was encountering Jesus in ways that I believe are always possible. The other thing is emotionally. So emotionally, and this is kind of a silly way to look at emotion, but get creative. I think for myself, as well as other people in my age demographic, so in my 40s, so if you're kind of in the midlife zone, we lose touch with our creativity. So I think of all the ways that I aspired for creativity in my youth and my 20s, and we can get so busy and not make space for it. So getting creative is another way to cope with emotional hangover and to really, again, try to prevent burnout. You don't know how to get creative, walk through Michael's. Okay, just check out what's there. Grab a coffee, go to Chapters. Do we call it Chapters still? The bookstore. Consider, like, I mean, some people go on Pinterest. I don't know how to operate Pinterest, but you could go on Pinterest for different ideas. Maybe you set some goals for cooking. Again, we want some healthy food and carving out some time to get to the grocery store to get some simple ingredients to make some simple food if you are so inclined creatively. But these are just different ways to manage, to create and regain stability. And then the occupational zone of our wellness wheels, just all the things that we do with our time as we're heading into January 2023. What are going to be our priorities and what are going to be the things that we say, maybe I'm not going to make space for this in my life. So let's just like be mindful. Be mindful of the wellness wheel. How am I doing socially? How am I doing emotionally? How am I doing intellectually? How am I doing physically? How am I doing spiritually? And how am I doing occupationally? And personally, like when I just read through those questions, I know the areas that I am lapsing on. And I feel somewhat Tony would call good shame, that it's like there's a bit of a motivation of saying I don't feel positive about myself when I'm letting some very big priorities lapse. Okay, you guys. So emotional hangovers, important thing, shorter duration than a burnout experience. And if you're in either of these zones, you're questioning emotional hangovers or burnouts, I really agree with doing a bit of Google research. I know it's dangerous. Google's dangerous, but there is some good stuff out there. Check out symptoms of both, evaluate yourself, talk to your doctor or your mental health provider. And hey, I just think we're not doing that great in Alberta. All the lockdowns, I'm so aware of how it impacted me and the people that I work with. And I'm positive that we're impacted. So if you have insurance, check out psychological services. There are so many amazing psychologists in Alberta. Okay, guys, happy 2023. I'm looking forward to this year. I'm looking forward to continued growth and how I am going to be practicing my wellness. We have some cool different things on my calendar, and I'm really excited to step into this new year. So peace and love. And we're so glad that you're here. Bye.